So a couple of years back, I still was young enough to have the ability to fall in love. And I really liked this one girl that I was dating. And for the sake of this video, let's call her Brittany. And I decided, well, I really like this girl. You know, let's ask her the question, right? The big question. And so what I didn't do is get on my knees. What I did was I said, hey, Brittany, how do you feel about the idea of having kids? And to my horror, to my dismay, Brittany said, well, kids are gross. Kids are disgusting. And it felt like a pit fell deep into my stomach. And I was, really taken aback by this response. And I say, well, why do you believe that? How do you think that? And what she said is, well, number one, kids are really expensive. I live in an American city, good old American city. We can't afford that. She says, well, it's not something I'll be able to afford in my lifetime. I said, well, okay. That kind of, makes some logical sense. And she says, not only that, but the other problem with having kids is global warming. I say, well, what do you mean? What does global warming have anything to do with having kids? And she said, well, we're going to be going extinct as a species in a couple of decades here. Why would I have kids and bring them into this world? Right? And this shocked me that she said this. And, I don't talk to Brittany anymore. And a couple of years have passed since this has happened. And so I've had some time to think about this. And what's interesting, right, is if you look at global birth rates, what you find is that Muslims per mother have about 3.1 kids. Christians have 2.7, and atheists have 1.6. So why is it so much lower for atheists? I think you can find the answer to this question by kind of comparing two of the world's richest men, Bill Gates and Elon Musk. If you take a look at what Bill Gates has said, Bill Gates has said things like, we are overpopulating the planet. If we keep having more and more people, join the planet, we're not gonna have enough food, we're not gonna have enough space, and we're gonna have too much global warming. Now, Elon Musk takes the exact opposite approach. What Elon Musk says is, well, no, we need to have more kids. Our problem isn't overpopulation, our problem is underpopulation. And so people always ask Elon Musk, well, what do you mean, man? And he says, well, obviously, the more people, the more minds. The more minds, the more ingenuity, the more creativity, the more collaboration, the more cooperation, the more we could solve our problems. And if you take a look at his businesses, he kind of builds his businesses this way. He's trying to bring humans to Mars and colonize Mars. He's trying to help with global warming with companies like Tesla and with solar. And so if you take a look at what makes these two billionaires different, really, fundamentally, is that Elon Musk has hope and Bill Gates doesn't have hope, right? Bill Gates is a little black-pilled. Now, if you take a look at secular philosophy, you go all the way back to the Greeks of antiquity, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. You take a look at the Stoics, Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca. You don't really find anyone advocating for hope. And that's simply because hope isn't reasonable. Hope doesn't really make sense logically. And the reason why hope doesn't make sense logically is because no one knows what the future is going to hold, right? Anyone who claims with certainty that they know what is going to happen in the future is lying. And so, it's very easy to conclude that, well, if no one knows what's going to happen in the future, then how could anyone hope in anything? It makes sense. Now, if you compare that to Christianity, in Christianity, not only is hope something that is a fundamental part of the religion, hope is also considered a virtue. It's not a secular virtue like courage might be. It is a religious virtue. It is a virtue of Christ, because in the Bible, it says that Christ said that the greatest three virtues are faith, hope, and love, right? So, why does Christianity think that if no one knows what the future is? And the reason why people think that in Christianity is because there's this fundamental idea to the Christian religion. And the reason why I'm talking so much about Christianity is because I was born Orthodox Christian, and I spent my life, going to church and attending Sunday school and reading theology. When I was younger, I still read some theology even today. And so I just have more experience with it than Islam. And so in Christianity, right, there's this fundamental idea, not everyone knows it explicitly. Some people, kind of know it as a vibe. Some people know it explicitly. And what this idea is that even if your life is trash, right? Even in poverty, even in ill health, even in, despair, there's like a bunch of bad things going on in your life. Even then, so long as you live in accordance to Christ's ethics, you can live as if you were in heaven while you're on earth. This is what Christians believe. They believe if you do all the things that Christ says that you should do, then you would be living in heaven regardless of your circumstance. Also, of course, to a lot of religions, hope is justified because there's either an afterlife or a reincarnation. So even if stuff is bad now, there's always the next life, or there's always, the afterlife. So Elon Musk hasn't really claimed to be a religious person. He says that he has hope because he's inspired by books like Lord of the Rings. He says Lord of the Rings is his favorite, book series of all time. And Lord of the Rings was written by Tolkien, who was a devout Catholic, and his intent was to infuse the story, this classic story of Lord of the Rings, with Christian virtues, right? And so you have some virtues like courage, resisting temptation in Lord of the Rings, all this sort of stuff. But you also have hope, right? After Gandalf dies, Aragorn says, and the Fellowship says, well, what hope do we have now? What hope do we have now? And Aragorn says, well, we're going to have to do without it anyway. We have to keep going. And, you see this time and time again with Samwise Gamgee. I don't want to kind of spoil Lord of the Rings in case you haven't seen it, which is kind of absurd, but, let's assume you haven't. There's this consistent theme of hope in the story, right? And when people have hope, they have kids. Because kids, they have hope that, humanity is, going to flourish, and they have hope in the future, whether it's the earthly future or the heavenly future. Now, I kind of want to end off this video by talking about something the great late historian Will Durant says about this. And what Will Durant says is a long time ago, before we had civilization, right? We were hunter-gatherers. We ran around, picked berries, we killed animals, all this sort of stuff, right? And he said, we can kind of get away with doing some stuff as hunter-gatherers that we can't get away with doing as agriculturalists, as people who were farmers. He says when we were hunter-gatherers, we could do things like, have a ton of sex with a ton of different people because, everyone is kind of running around in chaos. And, there was no structure. People kind of weren't tethered to a ground. He said that if you were to kill a rabbit, it would rot by tomorrow. You just eat it up, eat it up, eat it up. And you're kind of thinking about yourself. You're kind of thinking like an individualist. And you're just trying to spread your genes all over the place and survive. That's about it, right? And, if you saw someone, trying to poach the girl that you had sex with yesterday, the cave woman that you had sex with yesterday, you'll club them over the head. And there were no laws or rules or anything to stop them. Now, what Will Durant says is once we figured out farming, right, things had to change. We had to have more collectivist values because now, for the first time in human history, we had a surplus of food. And since we had a surplus of food, we were able to form villages. Take a look at the medieval village, right? you have blacksmiths, cobblers, coopers, you know, orchard herders, or whatever they're called, farmers. And so if you lived in these small villages, you needed more cooperation. And the ethics of a lot of religions are collectivist ethics, you know, love your neighbor as yourself, or, you know, don't lie, or put the group before yourself in a lot of ways, right? Love one another. You know, religion emphasizes this. Christianity does, right? And a lot of the other world religions as well. And so Will Durant says that there has never been a time in the history of human civilization where a civilization was able to survive in the absence of religion, because as hunter-gatherers, we existed as hunter-gatherers for a much longer evolutionary period than we existed as civilized men. And so then Will Durant posits that our individualistic instincts are very strong. They're very strong instincts compared to our much shorter evolved instincts of living as a collective in a village, in a city, in a town, in a country, right? And so, given that that's the case, he says humans need something, this appeal to the mystical, to keep them, you know, more tethered to these collectivist values. And through these collectivist values, civilization can exist and thrive. You know, we can cooperate, we can get along. You can't have a village, you can't have a town, you can't have a city for very long if there wasn't some baseline level of trust among the people, if there wasn't some level of cooperation amongst the people. If everyone is defecting on everyone else, you don't get a city. We're back to the caveman days, right? And religions kind of emphasize these ethics. And so I've been ranting for a while on this channel. I talk about living in accordance to nature, you know, living the way humans are meant to live. And by nature, I don't mean trees and plants and forests. I mean, you know, doing the things that are generative and that create joy and happiness. So if that's something that interests you, hit all the buttons, and we will see you guys in the next one. Peace.